You already know what this video is about, so let's jump right into it. In this video, I'm going to talk about the 7 things I wish I knew before booking a long-term Airbnb.
Oh, hi, Mark.
What's up, Freccero fam? Welcome back to my channel where I'd like to explore everything that life has to offer, and a huge part of that is traveling, and one of my favorite travel hacks is booking long-term Airbnbs. Now, I have already done a free-form, open format style video talking about long-term Airbnbs and just kind of giving you the overview of them and everything, but I wanted to do another follow-up video talking about all the things you really should know when it comes to booking a long-term Airbnb. Number 1, buying in bulk. This is the biggest thing. This is the biggest benefit of long-term Airbnbs, is that the longer that you book, the more money that you save. The longer that you book, the less money you're going to spend each night overall. This is very interesting. It does depend how long you book. Back in the day, you had to book at least 28 days or more to get this big bulk discount. They have changed that, so it does depend on how long you book, the timing of the year, where you book, etc., etc. But what's very interesting, and you may notice, booking 30 days typically is cheaper than, let's say, booking 20 or 25 days. The best analogy I can use, think of it like Costco, right? Like, you're gonna get a bulk pack of something that's 30 items, right? A bulk pack of 30 items. Now, let's say if you're gonna go and buy each item individually, at a certain point, the price of 30 in a bulk pack is gonna be cheaper than the price of maybe 10 or 11 or 12 or 13 of those items individually priced, if that makes sense. You know, think of it kind of like, in a weird way, like buying beer, right? If you go to a store and buy a single can of beer, at a certain point, maybe buy, I don't know, beer 3 or whatever, it's gonna be the same price as if you buy a 6-pack, because like I said, you're buying in bulk. This is a big thing you always wanna test out, and when you're on the Airbnb site, make sure you check the option that says show the total price. That way, as we all know, you don't have to get to the, let's say, final page and be like, oh, there's a $300 cleaning fee or whatever. That way you can see the total price of exactly what you're booking and kind of test it out. Let's say if you have to go to a place for, let's say, 3 weeks or 21 days, you might realize, and I'm not joking, that booking 25 or 30 days is gonna be cheaper than 21. So this is something you wanna weigh out. That's why a big thing I suggest is test it out. You might realize like, oh wow, I was only gonna go for 21 days, but if I book 26, I'm actually spending less money than 21 days. Why not stay for 26 days? Number 2, book the entire place to yourself. Now, when most people think of an Airbnb, they think of it as you're living in someone else's house, which is kind of the typical thing you do with an Airbnb. However, if you go into these settings when looking at Airbnb listings, you can select an option that says book the entire place to yourself. And this is pretty awesome because let's be honest, if you're staying somewhere for a weekend, you're living with other people, kind of like having roommates almost, no big deal. But if you're there for, like, say, an entire month, well, that's a little bit different. And I will say for me personally, when I do book long-term Airbnbs, I will typically book it to have the entire place to myself. I think it's just a little bit easier to get around. It's kind of nice having the entire place to yourself for a month. And as you can imagine too, like I'm doing now, I am constantly filming. So I also feel like too, given the noise that I make during the day, I'm not super loud, but even still, as you can hear me now, I am filming a lot of YouTube videos, and when I travel, I typically film even more, so I do like having the entire place to myself. One thing I do want to say is typically, booking the entire place yourself will usually be more expensive than if you're living in someone else's place. Probably not surprising, but you'd also be very surprised. A lot of times, you can actually find another place that's almost the same price, or even just a little bit more. For example, I was gonna be staying in Denver, Colorado for an entire month. And I remember I was gonna be living with people and everything. And I remember thinking like, do I really wanna be living with other people? Let's say if I'm out at 2 or 3 a.m. and I have to kind of come back and tiptoe around the house and be very quiet. And I found another Airbnb that was only $80 more for the entire month, and it was in a better location. I had an entire studio apartment to myself, completely worth it. So I do wanna stress that yes, typically, it might be a little bit more expensive, but if you do some digging, you'll find a lot of great deals where you have the entire place to yourself for as long as you want. Number 3, review everything. This is maybe the most important one on this entire list if I had to think about it. And here's the reason why. I'm not really gonna talk about hotels versus Airbnbs. I know that's a huge discussion for a lot of people, but one huge aspect is the refunds. Now, as we all know, you could book a hotel 6 months in advance, and let's say 2 days before your check-in time, you could cancel, no fee. You don't pay anything. You don't pay anything when you do book it, no issue. With Airbnb, it is the exact opposite. Let's say I'm going to book, let's say, a long-term Airbnb, so let's say a month, and I'm going to book it 6 months in the future. I pay right away. I pay up front. And as you can imagine, when you're booking a long-term Airbnb, you're looking at shelling out a good amount of money right away. Another thing is the refund policy or the cancellation policy. I mean, let's say, for example, with a hotel, you book it 6 months in advance, and a few days before you're going to check in, something comes up, right? Life happens. And you cancel, no big deal. With Airbnb, like I said, it's typically the opposite, where with a hotel, you can cancel typically up to 24 hours before your check-in time and you don't get penalized. With Airbnb, you can really typically, depends on the host, only cancel 24 hours after booking. So let's say if you book 6 months in advance and a week before your check-in time, something happens, there's a fair to good chance you might not get your money back, or you're going to get a very small portion back. If, let's say, it's a very big life event, a big traumatic event, I guarantee you could probably call Airbnb, let them know what happened, and maybe work something out. But it still is an issue you have to keep in mind, and that's why I suggest review everything. Some places let you cancel up to 24 hours after booking, no issue. Some places it's 3 days. Some places it's a bit longer. Some places give you no money back. This does depend, so make sure you research the refund policy. And of course, for you, make sure you're pretty certain, right? Like, say if you're on the fence about going or not, you're like, I don't know, I might have another obligation. Should I book it or not? I always suggest when it comes to Airbnb to be more hesitant to book and just make sure you know exactly what you're getting into. Ironically, almost the opposite of a hotel, where for me, there's been some times where I wasn't even sure if I was going to go somewhere, but I'm like, hey, why not reserve a hotel? If I can't go a week from that, I'll just cancel the hotel. No issue. I don't get penalized or anything. Another thing is look at the map. So when you book an Airbnb listing, you can also see both the listing view and the map view. And you kind of have to do this bit of like a traveling 101 tip. Look at, do you want to stay next to the hot spots of the city or outside? The biggest thing is Ubers and Lyfts and the transportation aspect. As you can imagine, the closer you are to the action, so to speak, the more expensive it's going to be. The further away you are, the least expensive or the less expensive it's going to be. However, you do have to do some math out because yes, maybe initially booking on the outskirts, way cheaper, but if you're constantly going in and out of the hot spots of the city, for me, I go out a lot doing videos about the nightlife, the nightclubs, and so on and so forth. If I'm constantly Ubering back and forth, like say every Friday and Saturday night or a lot of the nights, well, that can get very pricey. And if anything, it's going to cost me more money than have I just booked closer to all the spots I'm going to go to. Your location can have a massive effect on your budget, not just necessarily with the cost of the Airbnb, but everything included. And one last thing I do have to stress when it comes to reviewing everything is the amenities. Now, as we all know, Airbnbs come pretty well equipped. They are furnished. They might have other amenities like a blender or a Keurig or a coffee machine or whatever, but make sure you do some research. Does your Airbnb have AC or heating? Does it have pretty fast Wi-Fi? For me, uploading videos, I need fast Wi-Fi, and you can contact the host in advance and ask. So there's been some times I contacted some hosts and said, hey, how's your Wi-Fi, by the way? I need pretty fast Wi-Fi for work. Some of them said, yeah, no issue. Other ones said, no, I'm not gonna lie, given this location, the Wi-Fi just isn't the best. Another thing is parking. When I stayed in Austin, Texas, and Las Vegas for a month, for example, at those Airbnbs, I had parking. When it came to the Denver, Colorado one, it did not include parking, which means I had to do street parking, which, as you can imagine, is a whole other thing in itself. So make sure you know exactly what you're getting into. These are all these different things you want to review before booking. Number 4, a starting video. Now, luckily, huge knock on wood, I've never had to use this, but I do it just in case. And that is, before I enter the Airbnb, I'll take out my phone, maybe say something like, this is MarcFreccero, here is the time, here's the date, etc., etc., and I'll walk around the Airbnb and get a video in detail of everything. Because as you can imagine, and again, I've never had a bad host. I want to stress, I've never had a bad host, but I know people who have. Let's say there's already a crack in one of the walls somewhere, or there's already some kind of weird dent in the refrigerator door. Well, the last thing you want to have happen is you leave after an entire, let's say, month of being there, for example, and the host goes to Airbnb and says, hey, They left a huge dent in the refrigerator door. I'm gonna charge them for that. Now, when it comes to this video, hopefully, it's the type of thing you never have to use, but you have it just in case. What I typically do is I'll hold on to that video, my kind of opening video of the place. I'll hold on to it for maybe about 2 to 3 weeks after I check out, just in case. Number 5, quick communication. This is a very simple and straightforward one, something I really wish I knew earlier, and that is for most Airbnb hosts, they are super fast with communication. This is just something that's kind of good to know. Let's say if the Wi-Fi cuts out and doesn't work, let's say if the AC is not working, let's say if you just need something for whatever reason, even if you're staying in an entire place yourself, you'll be surprised how fast the hosts are when it comes to responding to you. I mean, hey, for most hosts I find, they give me their personal number and say, hey, text me or call me anytime. If anything happens, if you need anything, I'll be there in an instant. This is a pretty quick thing, I know, but I did want to mention this because when I first started doing long-term Airbnbs, I kind of thought initially, oh, I'm going to be in the dark, so to speak. If something goes wrong, I just kind of have to figure it out on my own. But no, Airbnb hosts are super, super responsive and there in an instant. Number 6, Airbnb protection. Now, this story is very important to this video. A bit of like a blessing in disguise situation. I did mention this story in that freeform, open format video I already did about long-term Airbnbs. I was staying in Las Vegas. I was out all night, literally all night. Got back at like 5 or 6 in the morning, walked into my place, stepped in, boom. I hear the crunch of broken glass. And I was like, what's going on? Looked around, broken glass everywhere, through the entire kitchen. Looked at all the windows, nothing broken. Checked all my stuff. Luckily, nothing got stolen. Turns out, and we still don't know why, which is weird, there was a glass kind of like plane over the oven, and I never used the oven, not even once. But there was a glass plane over the oven that just exploded for no reason. The host of the Airbnb came over, he inspected everything. He was like, I don't know what's going on. Even if you did leave like the oven on, for example, that shouldn't have happened. I don't know. We talked to Airbnb and I was not penalized whatsoever. But not only that, Airbnb said, hey, Mark, do you feel safe? Do you feel comfortable? Do you want to be relocated to another place? Has the host been responsive, etc., etc.? And this made me realize a very unique thing, like I said, a blessing in disguise, where I realized, wow, you know, if I'm ever in a situation that, let's say, I feel very scared or frightened, or let's say my stuff gets stolen, or something happens, I have Airbnb there, almost like a big brother or big sister looking over me just in case something goes wrong. Because take that same situation again, if let's say I booked a month-long place on Craigslist and that happened, there would be a good chance I'd be on the hook. Even though I did nothing wrong, I might get penalized for it. If let's say I randomly booked a month-long place somewhere else and my stuff got stolen, there's not really a lot I can do. But with Airbnb, they're there for you just in case. And so having that kind of Airbnb protection, so to speak, is a very nice comforting factor when traveling long-term. And last, but definitely not least, number 7, negotiate. Like a lot of things in life, the price isn't completely static. It's not set in stone. Like I mentioned earlier, you can contact the host ahead of time and ask them questions about the amenities and whatnot. But another thing you can do is request a custom price. You can contact them and say, hey, you know, I noticed that your place is about $1,500 for the month. Is there any way you could drop it down to $1,300? You'd be surprised how many hosts will be willing to negotiate with you. Now, I find as a little cool pro tip, there are 2 main type of hosts, and I guess some in between, but 2 main type. One only does long-term rentals. So you might see a host saying, hey, I only do rentals of 28 days or longer. That's it. Nothing shorter than 28 days. Other hosts do a combination. You can book it for 3 days. You can also book it for 30 and everywhere in between. And I find especially when it comes to these hosts that do both long-term and short-term stays, they're willing and a lot more willing to negotiate with you. Because as you can imagine for them, it's a lot easier to have one person for 30 days than let's say 10 groups of people each for 3 days. They have to clean up a lot more. They have to wash the sheets a lot more, etc., etc. So with these type of hosts, I find that I can get a lot bigger of a discount if I say, hey, I have great ratings on Airbnb. I've done this a lot. If you have just me, it's one person. I'm going to be there for 30 days. I'd love to work out something with you and negotiate. And even still, depending on the time of the year and other factors, still even ask people who only do long-term stays, because still, you never know. The worst that happens is they say, sorry, I know other people will take it at some point at that given price amount. I'm not willing to negotiate, but hey, you're always way better off asking because long-term Airbnbs are already pretty inexpensive when you factor out everything, and this can make them even cheaper.